Often the place that should be our refuge becomes hell on earth. Family blood doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it's what hurts the most. Good morning, my dear. This is Grandma Geraldine with my 78 years well lived. My white hair carries stories many wouldn't believe. I'm sitting here on my porch in rural Kentucky holding my prayer beads while the cicadas sing in the old oak trees in my backyard. Before I begin this difficult journey, I wanted to share a little secret with all of you. The team at Grandparents Tales is doing a new giveaway of $500 just for those watching this video. Participating is very easy. Just subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, give this video a thumbs up, and comment which city you're watching from, how many children or grandchildren you have, or any information about yourself to enter this giveaway. I'm really looking forward to reading and learning where you all are watching from. Let's go back to 1957 when I was just 8 years old. I was born on a poor little farm in rural Kentucky, deep in Appalachia. Our house was made of rough hunted logs with a dirt floor, no electricity, and no running water. The bathroom was a wooden outhouse in the yard with a hole in the ground. We bathed in a basin with water from the creek that ran nearby. There were many of us, my father, my mother, and 11 children. I was the second youngest. My father worked the land, planting corn, beans, and potatoes. Everything was for our own consumption. When there was extra, he sold it at the town market, which was 5 miles from our house. We walked there carrying things in sacks on our backs. My mother worked as a washerwoman for the wealthier families in the area. She'd leave early with a bundle of clothes on her head and return at the end of the day. Despite all the hardship, I have some good memories from that time. I played with my younger siblings under the apple trees, made dolls from corn husks, and caught small fish in the creek. The food was simple: cornbread with greens, beans with cornmeal, sometimes a piece of salt pork when we were lucky. But we never went hungry thanks to my parents' hard work. I had very little schooling. I went to school when I could in an improvised classroom in the local church. I learned to read and write, do basic math, but I had to stop at age 9 to help at home. I looked after my younger siblings, helped in the fields, went with my mother to wash clothes in the river. Everything changed when my father died. I was 10 years old. He was bitten by a copperhead snake while working in the fields. There wasn't time to get to the town hospital. He died right there in the arms of my mother and my oldest brother, Sebastian, who was 19 at the time. With my father's death, Sebastian became the man of the house. He was already working as a bricklayer in town, earning a little money, but it wasn't enough to support everyone. My mother started working twice as hard, washing clothes from morning until night. The other older brothers, Anthony, 17, Joseph, 16, and Francis, 15, also had to look for work. The house became quieter without my father. He was a tough man, like many from that era, but he never raised a hand to us. There was respect, you know. With him around, there was order. When he was gone, things started to fall apart. Sebastian started drinking. He came home late smelling of whiskey. He yelled at everyone, especially my mother. The poor woman, already tired from working so hard, just lowered her head and accepted it. I think she was afraid to confront him, afraid of losing what little support he provided. When I turned 12, it all began. One night, my mother had gone to sleep at the house of an employer who was sick and needed care. I was sleeping in the same room as my 2 older sisters, Mary, 14, and April, 13th, and my youngest brother, Peter, who was 6. I woke up with a hand covering my mouth. It was Sebastian. He smelled of whiskey, sweat, and tobacco. His eyes had a different gleam that still gives me chills when I remember it. "If you scream, I'll hurt Peter," he whispered in my ear. And then it happened. I won't go into details about what he did. You can imagine a 12-year-old girl not really understanding what was happening. It hurt. It hurt a lot. Not just my body, but my soul. When it was over, he said, "This stays between us. If you tell anyone, nobody will believe you, and I'll do worse." The next morning, I couldn't look my mother in the eyes when she returned. I felt shame, fear, confusion. I thought it was just that one time that he was drunk, that he had done a bad thing, but wouldn't repeat it. I was wrong. The following week, it happened again and then again. Always at night, always with the same threat, always with the same pain. After a few months, I noticed that my sister Mary was also acting strange. She cried for no reason, didn't want to be alone in the house. One day, I caught her secretly washing the sheets with blood stains on them. That's when I understood it wasn't just happening to me. Sebastian was doing that to her too. I tried to talk to my mother once. I gathered my courage after a particularly painful night. Mom, Sebastian is doing bad things to me at night, I said quietly while helping her hang the laundry. She stopped, looked at the horizon for what seemed like an eternity. Then she turned to me and said, "Better you than me, girl. That's just how men are. Learn to bear it in silence." Those words were like a knife to my heart. My own mother knew and wasn't going to do anything. Maybe out of fear. Maybe because she depended on the money he brought in. Maybe because she herself had gone through something similar. I'll never know for sure. Time passed and the situation only got worse. When I was 13, Anthony, my second oldest brother, started doing the same thing. He must have seen what Sebastian was doing and thought he could too. Then it was Joseph's turn and later Francis. By the time I was 14, I had been abused by 4 of my older brothers. Each one when they started would say the same thing. "If you're already doing it with the others, you'll do it with me too." As if I had a choice, as if I was to blame. When I cried or tried to resist, I got beaten. Slaps, punches, hair pulling. "Learn not to complain," they said. "Women should be quiet." I had marks all over my body, but nobody asked. At school, when I still went, I made up stories about falls, accidents. The teacher suspected, I think, but in those days, nobody interfered in family matters. Things kept getting worse at home. Sebastian lost his bricklaying job because of his drinking. Anthony started getting involved with gambling. Joseph was arrested for fighting in a store. Francis became an alcoholic too. The responsibility of supporting the house fell even more on my mother, who was already getting sick from working so hard. At 15, I tried to stay away from home as much as possible. I went with my mother to wash clothes, offered to make deliveries in town, anything to not be there when my brothers arrived. But it didn't always work. As time passed, the other brothers started too. Paul, Yakima, Benedict, Gerald, one by one, as if it were their right, as if I were a thing they could use. To this day, I don't understand how human beings, people of the same blood, can do this to a young girl. My sisters suffered too. Mary tried to run away once, but they brought her back. April got married very young at 14 to a 40-year-old man just to get out of the house. She went from one hell to another because her husband was also violent. It was during this time that I started attending the town church. Not that I believed much in God at that moment. How could I deal with everything that was happening? But it was a place where I felt safe for a few hours. Nobody touched me in church. Nobody hurt me. I sat in the last pew and stayed there quietly until it was time to go back. The priest, an elderly man named Father Anthony, noticed my constant presence. One day after Mass, he came to talk to me. "My child, I see you here every day. Is everything all right at home?" I almost told him everything. I almost screamed the whole truth, but the fear was greater. Fear of what my brothers would do if they knew I had spoken. So I just smiled and said everything was fine, that I just liked the peace of the church. At 16, my life was already an endless nightmare. Every day was the same. Work, suffer, cry in hiding, pray for a miracle that never came. That's when I realized that my period, which was never very regular, had been delayed for more than 2 months. My body was changing. My stomach, always skinny from so much deprivation, was starting to show a small bulge. I was pregnant, and the worst part, I had no idea who the father was. It could have been any of my 8 brothers who regularly abused me. I tried to hide it as long as I could. I wore loose clothes, tight bands around my stomach. But after 5 months, it became impossible to disguise. That's when my mother noticed. She shouted, giving me a slap that knocked me to the floor. "Been offering yourself around. Now you're going to bring another mouth for us to feed." I tried to explain that it wasn't my choice, that it was my own brother's, but she didn't want to hear. Maybe it was easier to blame me than to face the horrible truth about the son she had raised. When my brothers found out, the reaction was even worse. "Hi, must have been fooling around with some man from town." None of them admitted what they did to me. In front of the others, they pretended disgust, indignation, as if it wasn't them who, in the quiet of night, came to my mattress. The abuse stopped during the pregnancy at least. I think they were afraid of hurting the baby, or maybe the pregnant body didn't awaken the same interest. but the humiliations increased. It was as if I had committed the worst of sins when in fact I was the greatest victim in that house. And so I spent the months of pregnancy, working hard, even with my growing belly, eating the leftovers they gave me, sleeping in a corner of the kitchen because they no longer let me sleep in the room with the others. Alone, frightened, with a child growing inside me, a child who, despite everything, I began to love. The only person in the world who was truly mine. My God, how difficult it is to remember all this. But I need to tell them. I need you to know that these things happen, that there are hells inside houses that look normal from the outside. Perhaps my story will help someone who is going through something similar to seek help before it's too late. Oh, as I recall the things I experienced in that little log cabin, I realize that many people must be watching from very different places. Now, some perhaps from comfortable homes in the cities, others from rural areas like me, each with their own story. Tell me in the comments where you're watching this old grandma from. This helps me feel I'm not alone in this journey of sharing my life with you. And don't forget to give a thumbs up, okay? Each like is like a hug I receive, and that warms this grandma's heart. That's how I spent my childhood and early adolescence. A girl who should have been playing, studying, dreaming of the future, but who lived a daily nightmare at the hands of those who should have protected her. What I didn't know was that the worst was yet to come. The birth of that innocent child would be marked by a cruelty that even now, so many decades later, makes me cry when I remember. Typical rural Kentucky farm life, 1950 seconds, 10 resultados food and everyday life on Kentucky family farms, 19011950 by John Van Willigen and Ann Van Willigenuki.edu. Edu Food and Everyday Life on Kentucky Family Farms, 19011950 on js2gestor.org. Kiki Gov Farming in the 50s and 60 seconds. Wessel's Living History Farm, livinghistoryfarm.org.gov. Governor. What it took to build a farm in the 1950s. Farm and Dairy.com. Kentucky Agriculture Manufacturing. Coal Britannica.com. Food and Everyday Life on Kentucky Family Farms, 1920-1950. Missouri University of Science and Technology Library. Mastadu History of Kentucky. Wikipedia.org. Food and Everyday Life on Kentucky Family Farms, 19011950. The University Press of Kentucky.com. Child Abuse Reporting Laws, 1950 seconds. S10 Resulted Child Protective Services. Wikipedia.org. Mandatory reporting in the United States. Wikipedia.org. Or Child Abuse Background and History. FindLaw.com. Short History of Child Protection in America. SagePub.com. Child Welfare, Child Protection and Sexual Abuse, 1918-1990. History and Policy. History and Policy or Child Sexual Abuse Laws in the United States. Wikipedia.org. Or J. Brief Legislative History of the Child Welfare System. Masslegal Services.org. 1. Societal Recognition of Child Abuse. A Train Education. TrainSA.com. Child Abuse Reporting Legislation in the 1980s. Office of Justice Programs. GV34 US Code Paragraph 2341. Child Abuse Reporting US Code as Law. Legal Information Institute. Cornell.edu. Edu. Thank you for your request. I'll now continue with the American adaptation of the Brazilian script for your Grandparents' Tales channel, incorporating what I've learned about rural Kentucky farm life in the 1950s and child abuse reporting laws of that era. When home became hell, a grandmother's story of survival continued. The belly grew larger each day, like a clock marking the time of my sentence. The final months of pregnancy were the loneliest of my life until then. My family treated me as if I had a contagious disease. At meals, I ate last with whatever was left over. In work, no one lightened my load. Even with an 8-month belly, I still carried buckets of water from the creek, scrubbed clothes on the washboard, helped with the harvest. By that time, it was 1965. I saw other girls my age passing by on the road, going to school, some even dating, dreaming of marriage. Meanwhile, I carried within me not just a baby, but a secret that consumed me from inside like a slow fire. The only place where I found any comfort was still the church. I went in secret when I could, usually before dawn when everyone was still asleep or in the late afternoon, saying I was going to gather firewood. I sat in the last pew and prayed. I didn't know exactly for what. Maybe for a miracle. Maybe just for an end to the suffering in whatever form it might come. Father Anthony continued watching me with those kind eyes that seemed to see through my soul. Geraldine, he told me once when he found me crying after Mass, whatever is happening, God hasn't abandoned you, and I'm here too. I almost told him everything that day. The words were on the tip of my tongue, ready to leap out. But then I remembered my brother's threats, my mother's contempt, the baby who would depend only on me to survive. I swallowed my tears and the words, thanked the priest for his kindness, and returned home. To the hell I called home. I remember that winter was harsh in Kentucky that year. The cold nights were even harder because they made me sleep on the kitchen floor with only a thin blanket. My body aches from heavy work and advanced pregnancy. My feet swelled so much I could barely wear the old shoes I had. It was on one of those cold nights that I overheard a conversation that froze my blood more than the wind coming through the cracks in the log walls. My older brothers, Sebastian and Anthony, were talking in the yard near the window where I was lying. When that child is born, we have to get rid of it, Sebastian was saying, his voice altered by whiskey. If someone finds out the girl had a baby, they'll ask questions. And if they discover what happened here, we can say it was born dead, suggested Anthony. We bury it in the woods, and that's that. I hugged my belly tightly, as if I could protect my baby from those horrible words. At that moment, I made a decision. I would do anything to save this child. It was the only person in the world who was truly mine, the only one who hadn't hurt or betrayed me. Time was passing and I tried to think of a plan. Run away to where? With no money, no documents, no one to help me. How would I survive on the streets with a newborn? Ask the priest for help? What if my brothers found out and carried out their threats before I could get out of there? I started hiding small things. A piece of bread here, a few coins there, a change of clothes. I was preparing as best I could for the moment when the baby would be born and I would need to protect it even though I had no idea how I would do that. My mother during this time seemed to have aged 20 years. The hard work, the poverty, the troublesome sons, all of this had drained her strength and even her humanity. She looked at me as if I were a stranger, not the girl she had given birth to. Sometimes she would take her rosary and mutter prayers, looking at my belly with a mixture of disgust and resignation. You'll give birth in the shed when the time comes, she said dryly one night as I moaned with back pain. I don't want blood and filth inside the house. Those words hit me like a slap. Give birth in the shed like an animal. Was that what I was worth to her? But I had no choice, no voice to protest. I just nodded and swallowed one more humiliation. The days went by and I felt the moment approaching. The baby moved more and more as if it too was anxious to leave that place. Or maybe it sensed my fear, my anguish, and was trying to comfort me in the only way it could. One night, I woke up with a different pain, stronger, deeper, as if something was tearing my body from the inside. I tried not to scream, not to draw attention. I got up with difficulty and went out to the yard. The moon was full, lighting the way to the abandoned shed. The pigs had been sold months before when money got even tighter. The floor was packed with dirt mixed with old straw and dried manure. The smell was nauseating. The wooden walls had cracks that let in the cold July wind. It was there, alone in the night, that I prepared to bring my child into the world. The pains increased, coming in waves closer and closer together. I bit a piece of cloth to keep from screaming. My hands clutched the dirty straw, looking for something to hold onto while my body worked in that natural yet frightening process. I don't know how long I stayed there between excruciating pains and moments of exhaustion. Hours probably. The sky was beginning to lighten when I felt the urge to push. With no one to guide me, I followed my own body's instinct. And then, in a moment of indescribable pain, followed by sudden relief, my baby slipped into the world. Into that filthy shed, into that life that I didn't know how to protect. It was a girl, small, red, covered with that whitish substance that babies bring when they're born. And most importantly, she was alive. She cried, a weak cry that filled me with terror. If someone heard, with trembling hands, I cut the umbilical cord with a rusty knife I had hidden days before. I used rags I had set aside to clean her little face, her delicate body. I wrapped my daughter in a piece of old blanket I had hidden in the shed. Shh, my little one, I whispered, kissing her forehead. Mommy's here. Mommy will protect you. It was an impossible promise under the circumstances, but at that moment I believed in it with all the strength of my heart. The sun was already rising when I heard footsteps approaching. It was my mother, bringing a bucket of water and some rags. Is it over? She asked coldly, looking at the baby in my arms. Yes, I answered, instinctively pressing my daughter against my chest. It's a girl. She looked at the child for a long moment. For a second, I thought I saw something in her eyes. A spark of tenderness, perhaps, seeing that innocent little face. But soon, her gaze hardened again. Clean all this up. I don't want anyone asking questions around here, and find a way to keep that child quiet. That was all the help I received. No words of comfort, no gesture of affection for her newborn granddaughter. Just practical orders and the continuation of that contempt that had become her only form of relationship with me. With difficulty, I cleaned the shed as best I could. My body hurt terribly, still bleeding from the recent birth, but I had no time to rest, to recover. I had a life to protect now. I bathed my daughter with the water from the bucket, cleaned off all that blood and dirt. She was so small, so perfect. She had tiny fingers, delicate eyebrows, and lips that looked like a rosebud. How could something so pure come from so much horror? I baptized her right there, sprinkling a little of that water on her forehead. Mary Elizabeth, I whispered. Elizabeth, because that was what she brought to my dark life. Mary, in honor of Jesus' mother, who must have suffered seeing her son suffer. In the days that followed, I lived in a constant state of alert. I kept Mary Elizabeth hidden in the shed during the day while I worked. I ran there whenever I could escape to breastfeed her, clean her, and simply hold her in my arms. At night, when everyone was asleep, I would bring her close to me in the kitchen, taking advantage of the hours of darkness to properly care for her. It was the most difficult and most beautiful period of my life until then. Difficult because of the exhaustion, the constant fear, the painful recovery of my own body. Beautiful because of the moments with my daughter. Her baby smells even in those precarious conditions. Her gaze seemed to recognize mine, her little fingers grabbing my finger with surprising strength. I maintained this impossible arrangement for almost 3 months. 3 months of lies, of excuses to explain my absences, of desperate prayers that Mary Elizabeth wouldn't cry at the wrong time. 3 months living with a fear that never diminished, that accompanied me every second, every breath. My mother knew, of course. I don't know if she told my brothers or if she simply decided to ignore the situation, as she did with so many other things. Sometimes when no one was looking, she would leave an extra piece of bread near my place or a little more milk. Small gestures that didn't make up for her complicity in my suffering, but that in that desperate moment, I received with gratitude. Father Anthony also suspected something had changed. I could no longer go to church as often, and when I did, I was visibly exhausted, worried. Geraldine, he told me once, whatever is happening, remember that God sees everything and that this church is a refuge for those who need it. Those words stayed with me like a small seed planted that wasn't yet ready to sprout. A refuge. Would it be possible? Would there be a place where my daughter and I could be safe? While these thoughts grew in my mind, the abuse had restarted. As soon as my body recovered enough from childbirth, my brothers returned to their nightly visits. As if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't just given birth, as if it wasn't their bodies that had created that child I was hiding. The same hands that could have been a father to Mary Elizabeth were the ones that hurt me night after night. The same mouth that could have spoken words of love to a daughter spat insults and threats in my ear. It was a monstrosity that my teenage mind could barely process. And with each new abuse grew in me the certainty that I needed to leave, not just for me. I had almost accepted my fate, but for my daughter, what would happen when she grew up? Would the cycle of horror repeat? No, I wouldn't allow it. I would rather die. I began to plan a more concrete escape. I saved every coin I could take without them noticing. I hid small portions of food that I could carry. I gathered some baby clothes I had made from scraps, hidden from everyone. But fate, which had rarely been kind to me, chose this moment to deliver another cruel blow, a blow that would forever change the course of my story and push me to the most desperate moment of my young life. It was on a hot October afternoon. I had left Mary Elizabeth in the shed, carefully hidden among clean straw that I changed daily, and some rags that served as a blanket. I was in the field harvesting potatoes with my younger brothers, when I heard a scream coming from the direction of the house. My heart stopped. I knew even before dropping the potato basket and running what had happened. Someone had found my daughter, my secret, my treasure, my reason for living, discovered. When I arrived breathlessly at the yard, I saw a scene that would be engraved in my memory forever. Sebastian, holding my little Mary Elizabeth by the arm like a sack of potatoes. She was crying desperately, her little face red from so much effort. "So this is what you were hiding, you wretch," he shouted, shaking the baby in a way that made me fear for her fragile bones. "You really did give birth to the bastard, and still had the nerve to hide it." "Please," I begged, extending my arms toward my daughter. "Please give her to me. You're hurting her." "Please," Sebastian laughed, that cold laugh I knew so well, and that always preceded something terrible. "You really thought you could hide this? That you could raise this abomination under our noses?" The other brothers started arriving, attracted by the shouting. My mother appeared at the door of the house, her face an unreadable mask. "Mother," I called, desperate, "please help. She's your granddaughter." She just looked at the ground, at her own hands, anywhere but at me and the crying baby. Her silence was the answer I already expected, but that still hurt like a knife. Sebastian passed the baby to Anthony, who held her with the same contempt, the same brutality. "We're going to put an end to this right now," he said. "Should have done it when it was born." "No," I screamed, rushing forward to try to grab my daughter. I was stopped by Francis and Joseph, who held me by the arms with such force that I had bruises for weeks. "Please do whatever you want with me, but don't hurt her. She's just a baby." My pleas fell on deaf ears. I watched Anthony walking away with my daughter, disappearing in the direction of the road that led to town. Sebastian approached me, his face contorted in a mask of hatred. "You'll never see that child again," he said, his voice low and threatening. "And if you open your mouth to tell anyone at all, about this, I'll kill you, understand?" I collapsed on the ground when they released me, crying with a pain that seemed to split me in half. My daughter, my little Mary Elizabeth, taken where? To what fate? That night, lying on the kitchen floor as always, but now with a huge emptiness in the arms that for 3 months had held my daughter, I made a decision. It didn't matter what happened to me. It didn't matter the threats, the risks. I needed to find out where they had taken my baby. I needed to know if she was alive, if she was okay, and then somehow I needed to get her back and escape that hell forever. What I didn't know was that my brothers had other plans for me, plans that didn't include giving me time to look for my daughter, plans that almost ended my life, but that by a twist of fate would end up taking me to the only place where I could finally find redemption. It's important to note that in the 1950s and early 1960s, child abuse was just beginning to be recognized as a serious social issue. It wasn't until the mid-1960s that all states passed child abuse reporting laws following growing public concern about the issue. Child Protective Services, Wikipedia. Prior to 1974, when the Federal Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act was passed, there were no comprehensive federal laws addressing child protective services. Mandatory reporting in the United States, Wikipedia. During this era, poor coordination among social workers, welfare charities, and doctors meant that most child sexual abuse went undetected, and when cases did come to light, the response was often inadequate. Child Welfare, Child Protection, and Sexual Abuse, 1918-1990, History and Policy. The days following Mary Elizabeth's disappearance were the darkest of my existence. I woke every morning with that pain that only a mother separated from her child knows, a physical emptiness as if they had torn out a piece of my body. My breasts still produce milk, painful and swollen, constantly reminding me of the daughter who was no longer there to feed. They didn't allow me any mourning. The next morning, I was back at work in the fields carrying water, washing clothes. No one mentioned the baby. It was as if Mary Elizabeth had never existed, as if those 3 months of secret love had been just a dream. But I knew, my body knew, my broken heart knew. During the weeks that followed, I tried to discover what had happened to my daughter. I asked discreetly the few people I saw, a neighbor who came to buy eggs, the man who passed by selling pots and pans. "Have you heard of any babies appearing around here? Maybe left at the church or with some family?" No one knew anything, or at least no one wanted to tell me. Sebastian, always vigilant, noticed my attempts. One night he caught me alone in the yard, still looking for the bastard. "Give up. She's far from here now. And if you keep asking questions, you'll join her." That word here gave me a thread of hope. Her. So my daughter was alive. At least when they took her away, they hadn't done the worst. This small consolation was all I had to hold on to. At that time, already in 1966, I had just turned 17. I was no longer the frightened girl who accepted everything in silence. Motherhood, however brief, had planted a seed of courage in me that grew each day. I began to plan my escape more determinedly. Life in the house continued its rhythm of horror. The abuse didn't stop. On the contrary, it seemed more frequent, as if my brothers wanted to punish me for trying to hide the child. The physical aggression also increased. Any small mistake, burned beans, poorly washed clothes, was the reason for slaps, hair pulling, pushing. My mother at this time was already very sick. Years of heavy work and poor nutrition had taken their toll. She coughed constantly, a dry cough that came from deep in her chest. She was thin, weak, aged beyond her years. Still, there was no gesture of repentance or attempt to protect the daughter who suffered so much under her roof. One morning I woke up with intense vomiting. My stomach was turning, rejecting even the water I tried to drink. At first, I thought it was some spoiled food. But when the same thing happened the next day, and the next, an icy terror settled in my chest. I was pregnant again. The realization fell on me like a death sentence. I couldn't bear it all again. The humiliation, the pain, the inhumane birth, and then inevitably losing this child too. I couldn't take it. I would rather die. That night, I cried until I had no more tears. Alone in my corner of the kitchen, I hugged my still flat belly where another innocent life was beginning to form, condemned to be born into that cycle of horror. Forgive me, I whispered to that being that had barely begun to form. Forgive me for bringing you into this terrible world. The next day, I gathered my courage and went to the church, not for Mass. There wasn't any that day, but to talk to Father Anthony. It had been a long time since I had been able to go there. Watched, as I was by my brothers. I took advantage of the fact that they had all gone out to work, and my mother was sleeping, exhausted from the fever that was consuming her. I found the old priest tending the small garden beside the church. When he saw me, his tired eyes lit up. Geraldine, it's been so long, my child. I was worried about you. I couldn't take it. I broke down in tears right there among the flowers he cultivated with such care. Between sobs, I told him everything, or almost everything. I talked about the abuse, the previous pregnancy, the baby that had been born and taken away. I talked about the new life growing inside me and my despair, my fear of going through it all again. I didn't mention who the abusers were. Even there, falling apart, the fear of my brother's threats was greater than my need to reveal the whole truth. Father Anthony listened to everything in silence, his aged face showing a pain that reflected my own. When I finished, he took my hands in his. My child, he said, his voice breaking, what they did to you is a terrible sin before God and men. You need to leave that house immediately. I can help. I can find a safe place for you. It was everything I wanted to hear, everything I needed. A hand extended, a promise of help. But then I thought of Sebastian's cold eyes, of his threats, of the violence I knew he was capable of. And if he discovered I had spoken, and if he came after me after the priest, I need to think, I answered, wiping away the tears. I'm afraid of what they might do if I run away. Come back tomorrow, he insisted. Promise you'll come back and we'll have a plan. I promised with all sincerity. I really planned to return the next day to accept the help offered to finally escape that hell. But fate once again had other plans for me. When I returned to the house, I found my mother awake, coughing blood into a dirty rag. She seemed even worse than in the morning, her skin yellowish, her eyes sunken. Even after everything, I couldn't help but feel pity. I prepared a tea with herbs that grew in the yard, the only medicine we had available, and helped her drink it. For a moment, while holding that fragile woman who had once been strong, I thought about telling her about my new pregnancy, about my escape plans. Maybe faced with death that was clearly approaching, she would find in herself some remnant of maternal love, some desire to protect me, even if belatedly. Mother, I began hesitantly. I'm expecting another child. She looked at me for a long time, her difficult breathing making her chest rise and fall with effort. For a moment, I thought I saw a flash of sadness, of remorse perhaps, in her tired eyes. But when she spoke, her voice was the same as always, cold, distant. This time they won't let it be born. I heard Sebastian talking. A chill ran down my spine. What did he say? That they won't go through the same shame again. That this time they'll resolve it before. Her words confirmed my worst fear. They wouldn't just take my baby after birth, they planned to prevent it from even being born. How? I didn't know, but knowing my brother's cruelty, I could imagine. I need to get out of here, I said, more to myself than to her. My mother closed her eyes as if she were too tired to continue that conversation. After a long silence, she spoke without opening her eyes. Go. You were always the strongest of all of us. I was shocked. It was the closest thing to love or approval she had given me in years. Maybe the proximity of death was softening her hardened heart, or maybe it was just the delirium of fever. Either way, those words gave me extra strength for what was to come. That night, as I prepared dinner, I observed my brothers around the table. Sebastian and Anthony were talking in low voices, occasionally glancing at me in a way that put me on alert. The others ate in silence, exhausted from work. My mother was lying down, unable to get up for the meal. I served everyone as usual, leaving my own plate for last with the leftovers. But this time, I didn't eat. Something in the way Sebastian smiled when I put the plate in front of me made me suspicious. Not hungry? He asked with a false concern that made my stomach turn. Eat. You need to feed yourself in your condition. So he knew. He knew about the pregnancy. How? I wasn't sure. Maybe he had noticed the morning sickness. Or maybe my mother, in her feverish delirium, had let our conversation slip. I'm not hungry, I answered, pushing the plate away. I'm going to see how mother is. I went to the room where my mother was resting, closing the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the improvised bed where she was lying. Her breathing was shallow, difficult. She didn't open her eyes when I entered. It was then that I heard the laughter coming from the kitchen. Laughter from someone who knows they've set a successful trap. And I understood with crystal clarity what they had done. The plate, my plate of food, they had put something in it. Poison probably. The same we used to kill the rats that infested the barn. They were trying to kill me and the baby I was carrying. A wave of nausea hit me, but this time it wasn't from the pregnancy. It was pure terror. If I had eaten that food, if I hadn't suspected, there was no more time to lose. I couldn't wait until the next day to meet the priest to elaborate a careful plan. I had to leave that house that very night, or I wouldn't live to see the sunrise. I waited until everyone was sleeping, the heavy snoring of Sebastian, the lighter breathing of the others. I got up silently from my corner in the kitchen. I already had everything planned in my head. I would take the few coins I had hidden in the yard, a bundle with the extra set of clothes I owned, and leave without looking back. But before leaving, I went once more to the room where my mother was sleeping. I couldn't leave her without saying goodbye, even after everything. She was asleep, her breathing even more difficult than before. She seemed like a candle about to go out. Goodbye, mother, I whispered, lightly touching her forehead hot with fever. May God have mercy on your soul. There was no response, just a slight movement of the eyelids. It was enough. I left the room silently, took my few hidden things, and walked to the front door. It was when I heard a sound behind me, a creak of floorboard, a contained breath. I turned quickly and saw Sebastian standing there, his eyes shining in the darkness like those of a predator animal. Going somewhere, little sister? He asked, his voice slurred from the whiskey he had drunk earlier. My heart raced. I clutched the bundle of clothes against my chest as if that piece of cloth could protect me. I'm going to get water from the well, I lied, my voice trembling, betraying my fear. With your things in the middle of the night, he laughed, a sound that froze my blood. I don't think so. I think you're trying to run away, and that I can't allow. He advanced toward me, his hands extended like claws. I didn't think, I just reacted. I turned and ran to the door, pushing it with all the strength I had. The cold night air hit my face when I went out to the yard, running toward the road. I heard Sebastian behind me, cursing, threatening. I ran like I had never run in my life, driven by pure terror and the certainty that if he caught me, it would be my end. My bare feet hit the hard earth of the road, hurting on the stones, on the fallen branches. The darkness was almost complete, only the waning moon providing a little light to guide my desperate steps. Behind me, the steps and shouts of Sebastian seemed to be getting more distant. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs trembled from exhaustion. When I finally stopped, leaning on a tree at the side of the road, I realized I couldn't hear anything behind me anymore. I managed it. I had escaped. But where to go now? The nearest town was miles away. The church of Father Anthony was in the opposite direction, and I didn't dare go back. Sebastian would certainly be looking for me. Maybe had already woken the other brothers to help in the search. I decided to continue on the road in the direction of the town. It was my only chance. I walked all night, stopping only to rest briefly when my legs would no longer support me. When the sun began to rise, I was already on the outskirts of Lexington. It was a small town, but for me, who rarely left the rural area, it seemed enormous and intimidating. The stone streets, the clustered houses, the people beginning to go out to work, everything gave me a feeling of disorientation and fear. I didn't know anyone there. I had nowhere to go, nothing to eat. The few coins I had brought with me would barely buy a loaf of bread, and I was beginning to feel a strange pain in my belly, not like the nausea of pregnancy, but something deeper, more worrying. When I looked down, I saw blood stains on my skirt. Dark blood is different from menstruation. With horror, I understood what was happening. I was losing the baby, maybe from the effort of the escape, maybe from some remnant of poison that I might have ingested without realizing, or maybe simply because that little life like the previous one was not destined to live in this cruel world. I sat on the sidewalk of a side street less busy and cried silently. For the physical pains, yes, but mainly for the loss of another child that I wouldn't even get to know. For the life I had left behind, as terrible as it was. For the fear of the unknown future that awaited me. It was there, hunched over in pain, on a sidewalk in Lexington, bleeding the life that was leaving from inside me, that I saw a church across the street, not the small chapel of the village that I knew, but a larger, more imposing church, a place that instinctively seemed safe to me. With effort, I got up and crossed the street. Stumbling, I climbed the few steps that led to the entrance and pushed the heavy wooden door. The interior was cool and silent, illuminated only by a few candles and the light that came in through the colored glass windows. I advanced down the central aisle between the empty pews. The altar seemed distant, almost unreachable in my state of weakness. But I continued, one step after another, guided by some force that I couldn't explain. When I got close to the altar, my legs finally gave way. I fell to my knees, my hands clutching the railing that separated the nave from the presbyter. The pain in my belly was now unbearable, and I could feel the warm blood flowing down my legs, staining the stone floor beneath me. "Help me," I whispered, not knowing exactly if I was speaking to God, to the saints whose images watched me from the walls, or simply to whoever might hear. "Please help me." And then darkness enveloped me, merciful in its promise of an end to the pain. The last thing I saw was a figure approaching quickly, a woman in a black and white habit, her face expressing alarm and compassion. A nun, an angel, I thought, as my consciousness faded. An angel sent to take me to heaven, or perhaps, just perhaps, to save me. When I opened my eyes again, I didn't recognize where I was. A white ceiling, light walls, clean sheets under my aching body. For a moment, I thought I had died and arrived in heaven. So different it was from that hell I called home. But the pain I felt was too real for paradise. I tried to sit up, but a gentle hand touched my shoulder, stopping me. It was the same nun I had seen before fainting, a middle-aged woman with a serene face, framed by the black and white habit. "Stay lying down, my child," she said with a calm voice. "You lost a lot of blood." Gradually, the memories came back, the desperate escape in the night, the blood, the church, and with the memories came the realization, the baby. Instinctively, I put my hands on my belly, now empty and painful. "The baby?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. The nun made the sign of the cross and shook her head. "I'm sorry, we couldn't save it." I closed my eyes, letting the tears flow silently. Another child lost. Another life that didn't resist the horror of my existence. A part of me felt relief. That child wouldn't suffer what I suffered, wouldn't be born into that environment of violence and perversion. But another part cried for the loss, for what could have been in other circumstances. I stayed in that improvised infirmary inside the convent for 2 weeks. I found out later that I had been found by Sister Grace, who called the town doctor immediately. He diagnosed a spontaneous miscarriage, probably caused by extreme stress and physical effort. My body was weak, malnourished, covered with old and new bruises, silent evidence of the life I had left behind. The nuns took care of me with a gentleness I had never known before. They fed me, cleaned my wounds, provided clean clothes. More importantly, they didn't judge me, didn't bombard me with questions I wasn't ready to answer. It was only when I began to regain my strength that Sister Grace sat beside my bed and asked with that serene voice that would become so familiar to me in the years that followed, "Do you want to tell us what happened, my child? Who did this to you?" The words came like a flood after a long drought. I told everything. The years of abuse, the first pregnancy, the birth in the shed, my daughter torn from my arms, the second pregnancy, the attempted poisoning, the desperate escape. I spoke non-stop as if each word expelled from my body was a poison being drained. Sister Grace listened to everything in silence, just holding my hand, her eyes filling with tears as my story unfolded. When I finished, exhausted and empty, she did something that no one had ever done. She hugged me, a firm maternal hug that said more than any word could. "You're safe now," she said finally. "No one will hurt you here." I believed her. Perhaps for the first time in my life, I felt I could trust another human being. In the days that followed, other decisions needed to be made. The Mother Superior of the convent, an elderly lady called Sister Agnes, came to talk to me about what I wanted to do next. "We can help you find work in town, perhaps as a maid in some family home," she offered. "Or if you prefer, you can stay with us longer, helping with the convent tasks while you recover completely." The idea of leaving that refuge, of facing the world out there where my brothers could find me, caused me panic. "Can I stay?" I asked, almost begging. "I'll do any work. I don't mind if it's hard. I just don't want to go back there." The Mother Superior nodded, understanding. "You can stay as long as you need. We all have our own path to healing." That's how I began my new life at St. Mary's Convent in Lexington. At first, I did simple tasks. I helped in the kitchen, washed clothes, and swept the corridors. Work not very different from what I did at home, but done in an environment of peace and respect that completely transformed the experience. Gradually, I opened up to the other nuns. There were 12 of them in the convent of different ages and backgrounds. Some had entered very young out of religious vocation. Others had come later in life after losses or disappointments. All treated me with respect and affection. Although I was just a helper, not a novice or a nun, I learned a lot. In those first months, to read better, to write correctly, to do more complex math. Sister Grace, who had been a teacher before entering the convent, dedicated an hour every afternoon to teach me. Other nuns shared their specific knowledge. Sister Teresa taught me about medicinal plants in the convent garden. Sister Louise about cooking. Sister Marianne about sewing. But the most important learning wasn't in books or practical skills. It was in the daily example of those women who had dedicated their lives to serving others, who found joy in simple things, who lived with purpose and inner peace. About 6 months after my arrival, I received news that I didn't know how to process. Sister Grace called me to the small room where the Mother Superior received visitors. There was a man I vaguely recognized, the milk seller who sometimes passed by my parents' farm. "Your mother passed away, girl," he said, taking off his hat as a sign of respect. "It's been 2 weeks already. Pneumonia, they said." I stood there, not knowing what to feel. My mother, who had allowed my suffering for so many years, who had chosen to look the other way while her sons destroyed her youngest daughter, was dead. Should I cry, feel relief, anger, forgiveness? "Your brothers are looking for you," the man continued, unaware of my inner confusion. "They say you ran away with their money, that they want you to come back home." A shiver of terror ran down my spine. So, they hadn't given up. They were looking for me, probably to finish what they had started. "She won't go back," Sister Grace said firmly, putting a protective arm around my shoulders. "We thank you for the information, but Geraldine is safe here with us." The man shrugged as if it wasn't his problem. After his departure, I collapsed in tears in Sister Grace's arms. Not for my mother's death, I realized, but for the fear that still dominated me, for the ghost of my brothers that seemed to pursue me even in that sanctuary. "They can't come in here," she assured me. "We won't let them take you back." That night, lying in the small cell I now called mine, I thought a lot about my mother, about how she had failed to protect me, about how she had allowed that horror to happen under her roof. But I also thought of her as a victim, of a life of poverty, of a system that didn't value women, of sons she had raised alone. After becoming a widow, I prayed for her soul for the first time in my life, feeling that my prayers really reached somewhere. And somehow in that process, I found in myself a forgiveness I didn't know I was capable of feeling. Not a forgiveness that erased what had happened, but that allowed me to move forward without carrying the weight of hatred. In the months that followed, I continued my life in the convent, increasingly integrated into that community of women. The fear of my brothers never completely disappeared, but it decreased with time. I learned something new every day, not just about practical work, but about myself, about my inner strength that had survived it all. At the end of that year, 1967, something happened that would again change the course of my life. One day, while helping to organize the small convent library, I found a book with photographs of abandoned babies who had been adopted through the mediation of the church. I spent hours looking at those images, imagining if my Mary Elizabeth was there, if she had found a loving family, if she was well. Sister Grace found me like this, absorbed in those pages, silent tears running down my face. She sat beside me and waited for me to speak. "My daughter," I began, my voice trembling. "I'll never know what happened to her. Will I? I'll never find her." The nun took my hands in hers. "The future belongs to God, Geraldine. We don't know what He has in store for us, but I can tell you that many children like your daughter are taken to orphanages or to families who can't have children. There is hope that she is well." That conversation planted a seed in me. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about my lost daughter, about other children like her, separated from their mothers by tragic circumstances, and also about children like I had been, abused, neglected, trapped in situations they couldn't escape from. One afternoon, I gathered my courage and went to talk to the Mother Superior. I told her about my thoughts, about the growing desire to do something for these children, to transform my pain into something positive. "I want to help children who suffered like me," I said, surprising myself with my own determination. "I want them to know they're not alone, that there's hope, that they can survive and find peace like I found here." The Mother Superior looked at me for a long moment, as if seeing beyond the hurt young woman who had arrived at the convent, almost dying. Finally, she smiled, a rare smile that illuminated her austere face. "Perhaps that's the reason God brought you to us, Geraldine, to heal yourself and then help heal others." In the months that followed, with the blessing of the Mother Superior, I began to work a few hours a week at the orphanage run by the nuns in Lexington. It was work that broke my heart and healed it at the same time. Each abandoned child reminded me of my own lost daughter. Each mark of abuse I saw on their small bodies transported me back to my own suffering. But each smile I managed to draw, each small improvement I witnessed was like a balm for my wounds. I had just turned 18 when Sister Grace asked me a question that would change everything. We were sitting in the convent garden after a long day at the orphanage, watching the sunset color the Kentucky sky. "Have you ever thought about becoming one of us, Geraldine?" she asked, her voice as gentle as always. "About taking vows, dedicating your life to God, and serving others?" The question caught me by surprise, although, thinking about it, maybe I had been expecting it for some time. I had been living in the convent for almost a year, participating in all the prayers and rituals, following the same routine as the nuns, but to officially become one of them, to make perpetual vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. "I don't know if I'm worthy," I answered honestly. "After everything that happened to me, everything they did to my body," Sister Grace took my hands, interrupting me. "What they did to you doesn't diminish your value in God's eyes. You're not to blame for the sins committed against you. And perhaps it's precisely because of your suffering that you have so much to offer to others." I asked for time to think, to pray about this important decision. For weeks, I reflected deeply on what I wanted for my life. The convent had become my home, the nuns, my family. The work with the abandoned and abused children gave meaning to my days, transformed my own pain into something useful. But there was also that part of me that still dreamed of finding my daughter one day. That wondered if I could have a normal family, a life outside those walls, a life that at 18 years old was theoretically still all ahead of me. In the end, it was an unexpected visit that sealed my decision. It was a Sunday afternoon when one of the novices came to call me, saying there was a man asking for me at the entrance. My heart immediately raced, the familiar fear taking over me. Could it be one of my brothers? Had they finally found me? Sister Grace went with me to the parlor where we received rare visitors. Through the grate that separated the interior of the convent from the outside world, I saw a face I didn't immediately recognize. A middle-aged man, graying beard, tired eyes. "Geraldine?" he asked, and something in his voice awakened a distant memory. "It's me," I answered cautiously. "I'm Jim, your father's cousin. I came from far away to find you." I tensed up, distrustful. What would a distant relative who I barely knew want with me after so much time? "Your brothers are looking for you," he continued, confirming my fears. "Sebastian especially. He's not right in the head. Say strange things that you need to pay for what you did, that you know too much." I felt the blood drain from my face. Even after so much time, even after everything, they still wanted to silence me. The fear I thought I had overcome returned with full force, freezing me from the inside. "Why are you telling me this?" I managed to ask. The man looked down as if ashamed. "Because I heard rumors that you were here, and because I know what happened in that house. Not everything, but enough. I always suspected but never did anything. I carry that guilt with me." Sister Grace squeezed my hand, giving me strength to continue listening. "I came to warn you," he continued. "Sebastian has been coming to Lexington regularly. He's asking about you in the taverns, in the stores. It's a matter of time until he discovers about the convent. And he swore he would end you when he found you." A heavy silence fell over us. The threat hung in the air, almost palpable. After a few moments, I managed to find my voice again. "Thank you for warning me," I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. "But I'm not afraid of him. Not anymore. I found my place here, my family, my mission. If he comes, he won't find me alone and defenseless like before." The man nodded slowly, seeming impressed with my determination. After his departure, Sister Grace hugged me, her eyes shining with what seemed like tears of pride. "You're stronger than you think, Geraldine," she said. "You always were." That night, I made my decision. If Sebastian really found me, the convent would be the safest place for me. And more than that, I wanted to officially belong to that community that had welcomed and saved me. I wanted to dedicate my life to doing for others what they had done for me. The next morning, I sought out the Mother Superior and asked to officially begin my novitiate. The path to becoming a nun would be long, 2 years as a postulant, then the novitiate, and finally the vows. But I was determined to follow this path to completely transform the abused and broken girl who had fled barefoot on an October night into a strong woman dedicated to serving and protecting the most vulnerable. I never knew if Sebastian ever found me. Maybe he gave up. Maybe he was prevented by the protection the convent offered me. What I know is that gradually the fear of him and my other brothers diminished, replaced by the certainty that I had found my true place in the world. In 1969, at 19 years old, I made my first vows, officially becoming a novice. I received a new name, Sister Mary Elizabeth, in honor of the daughter I was never able to raise, but whose brief passing through my life had put me on the path of redemption. It was my way of keeping her alive, of honoring what we had shared. In those few months, the following years were of growth, learning, and service. I continued working at the orphanage, now with more responsibilities. I studied, completed my formal education, specialized in child psychology through correspondence courses. I wanted to better understand the traumatized children we cared for, wanted to give them what I myself had not received: understanding, support, tools to heal. At 23 in 1973, I made my perpetual vows, committing myself definitively to that life. The frightened young woman who had entered the convent bleeding and half dead was now transformed into a serene, purposeful woman dedicated to making a difference in the world through her work with the most vulnerable children. And that's how, my dears, I survived that hell on earth. Not only survived, but found a purpose, a mission. The pain didn't completely disappear. Some nights I still wake up with nightmares. Some memories still make me shudder. But I learned to live with them, to use them as fuel for my work, for my dedication to children who, like I once was, desperately need someone who believes in them, who protects them, who shows them there is hope beyond suffering. And what about my Mary Elizabeth, my lost daughter? I never found her, but every day, in each child I help, in each smile I manage to awaken on a little face marked by trauma, I see a piece of her. And that's enough for me. That completes me. The following years after my consecration as a nun were of profound transformation. The 1970s brought changes to America and to the world. and I inside the walls of Stidi. Mary's convent was also transforming. I was no longer that terrified girl who fled barefoot on a dark night. I was Sister Mary Elizabeth, a woman with purpose, with mission. The work at the orphanage became my life. Each child who came to us carried their own story of pain. Some abandoned, others victims of violence, others orphaned by various tragedies. I saw in each of them a piece of myself, of my own story. But I also saw possibilities, futures that could be different from mine. In 1975, at 25 years old, I took over the coordination of the orphanage. The Mother Superior recognized in me not just dedication, but a special gift for connecting with those children that others considered difficult or problematic. I understood them like no one else. I knew the silent language of trauma, the behaviors that were actually cries for help, the distress that served as a shield against more pain. The children feel that you've been where they are. Sister Grace told me, now my counselor and closest friend. They recognize in you someone who truly understands. Under my coordination, we implemented significant changes in the orphanage. We abandoned rigid disciplinary practices that, although well-intentioned, often re-traumatized children already so hurt. We introduced more moments of play, of artistic expression, of choice and autonomy. We brought mental health professionals to work with us, a novelty at the time when little was said about the psychological effects of childhood trauma. The result was visible. Children who arrived withdrawn, aggressive, or completely mute began to flourish. Not immediately, not without relapses. Healing is never linear, as I well learned in my own journey. But there was progress. There was hope. Around 1977, our work began to be recognized beyond the limits of Lexington. We received visits from educators, from representatives of other orphanages, even from government authorities interested in our approach. It was a period of expansion. More children, more staff, more resources. With growth came new challenges. The bureaucracy, the politics, the demands of funders didn't always align with what we believed was best for our children. There were times when I felt frustrated, when the simplicity of my vocation seemed to get lost among reports and meetings. In those moments, I took refuge in the convent chapel. There, in silence, I reconnected with the purpose that had brought me to that life. I prayed not just for the children under my care, but also for the girl I had been, for the young mother who lost 2 children, for the brothers who hurt me so deeply. Yes, even for them, I prayed, not out of a sense of moral superiority, but because I learned that carrying hatred was like drinking poison, expecting the other to die. It was on one of those prayer afternoons in 1979 that I received an unexpected visit. One of the youngest novices came to get me, saying there was someone looking for me in the parlor. My heart still accelerated in these moments, even after so much time. The fear that my brothers had found me never completely disappeared. Who was waiting for me, however, was a woman approximately my age, well-dressed, with an anxious expression on her pretty face. She introduced herself as Teresa, a social worker from an orphanage in Louisville. "We've come from far away to learn about your work, Sister Mary Elizabeth," she said, accompanied by 2 colleagues. "What you're doing here is revolutionary." I was surprised. Our work was important, yes, but revolutionary. We were just doing what we considered right, treating children with the dignity and respect they deserved. The conversation that followed was long and productive. Teresa explained that there were many orphanages across America trying to improve their practices, abandoning old and punitive methods. They wanted to learn from us, wanted me to share our approach. "You have a special gift," she said at the end of the conversation. "You can see beyond the problematic behaviors, see the hurt child behind them." "It's not a gift," I replied, feeling the tears forming. "It's an experience." Something in my voice must have revealed more than I intended, because Teresa looked at me for a long time, with an understanding that went beyond the words spoken. Sometimes, she said softly, the greatest healing comes from the deepest wounds. That meeting was the first of many. In the years that followed, I began to travel to other orphanages, to conferences on education and child protection, to training sessions for teams that worked with vulnerable children, always with the permission of the Mother Superior, always keeping my vows and commitments, but expanding my work beyond the walls of our orphanage. America in the 1980s was in transformation. The passage of the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act in 1974 had established federal funding for child protection services and hotlines, and more states began adopting comprehensive reporting laws, mandatory reporting in the United States, Wikipedia. And I surprisingly found myself in a position to influence some of these changes, sharing the knowledge born from my own pain and my daily experience with traumatized children. It was a decade of expansion, of growth. Our orphanage became a national reference. I, who had barely studied in childhood, now wrote articles for specialized publications, gave lectures, and trained teams. All this without ever losing sight of my main mission: the children. Each individual child with their unique story, with their specific needs, with their unexplored potential. In 1987, an episode occurred that deeply shook my newly found peace. I was returning from a trip to Chicago where I had participated in a conference on adoption when I saw a familiar face at the bus station in Louisville. An aged face marked by time and probably by alcohol, but that I still immediately recognized. Sebastian, my oldest brother, the first to hurt me, the leader of the others, was there a few meters from me. He didn't see me. I was in my habit, something he probably never imagined for me. I stood paralyzed, observing him from afar. He seemed shorter than I remembered, more fragile. He was poorly dressed, dirty, staggering slightly. Clearly, life had not been kind to him. For a moment, I thought about approaching him, about saying who I was, about confronting him with everything he had done, with the person I had become despite him, not because of him. But then he turned, and I saw his eyes, those same eyes that had terrorized me for so many years, and in them I saw no remorse, no regret. I saw only the same darkness as always. I let him go without revealing myself, not out of fear. Surprisingly, I realized I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I let him go because confronting him wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't give back my childhood, wouldn't bring back my lost children, wouldn't heal my scars. And I had already learned over the years that some people never recognize the evil they do, never really change. That brief encounter, however, brought up memories and emotions that I thought I had completely processed. In the weeks that followed, the nightmares returned. I woke up sweating, screaming sometimes, reliving the horrors of the past. Sister Grace, now an elderly lady but still my closest confidant, noticed my disturbance. "What happened, my dear?" she asked one night after finding me in the chapel at 3 o'clock in the morning, praying to ward off the ghosts that had come back to haunt me. I told her about the encounter with Sebastian, about how that brief glimpse had reopened wounds I thought were healed. And then, surprising us both, I confessed something I had never admitted out loud. A part of me still looks for her, for Mary Elizabeth, my daughter. In each new child that comes to the orphanage, in each young woman I see on the street with the age she would have, I still look for her. Sister Grace took my hands, her eyes full of compassion. "It's natural, Geraldine. She's part of you, always will be. But remember, you've been a mother to hundreds of children over these years. Not just a mother who feeds and dresses, but a mother who understands, who heals, who transforms lives." Her words comforted me as always, but they also planted an idea that would grow in the years that followed. The idea that maybe, just maybe, I could try to discover what had happened to my daughter. America in the late 1980s and early 1990s was in profound transformation. The Child Welfare Act was promulgated in 1980, bringing a new era of rights and protections. My work expanded to include training on this new legislation, consultancies for organizations that were adapting to the new requirements. With more visibility came also more access to resources and influential people. In 1992, during a seminar in Washington, D.C., I met a judge from the Children's Court who became interested in my story. Not the painful part of my childhood, which I kept private, but my journey of transforming the Lexington orphanage into a model of trauma-centered childcare. After several conversations, I found the courage to tell her about Mary Elizabeth, about how she had been taken by my brothers when she was only 3 months old. I asked if there would be any way after so much time to discover what had happened to her. The judge was kind but realistic. "After almost 30 years, sister, without documents, without official records, it would be practically impossible, especially considering that at that time informal adoptions were common. Children were handed over without any documentation." I nodded, already expecting this answer. But she continued, "However, we can try. If you have any information, approximate date, location, names, I can ask them to do a search in the old records." That's how at 42 years old, I began a search that seemed impossible. I provided what I knew: the approximate date of Mary Elizabeth's birth, the fact that my brothers probably took her to Lexington or some nearby town, their full names. It was very little. I knew that, and the chances of finding any information after so much time were minimal. Months passed without news. Life continued. The work at the orphanage, the trips to share our methodology, the daily prayers that maintained my inner balance. I had almost forgotten about the search when I received a letter from the judge. I opened it with trembling hands, my heart racing. But the content, although gentle, confirmed what I already knew in my heart. There were no records. No child with that approximate birth date had been formally adopted or institutionalized in the region. If Mary Elizabeth had survived, and I prayed every night that she had, her whereabouts were a mystery that would probably never be solved. The letter ended with words of consolation. "The work that you do has transformed the lives of so many children. Perhaps that is the greater purpose that emerged from your pain, not to find one child, but to save hundreds." I cried reading those words, but they weren't just tears of sadness. There was also gratitude for having survived, for having found a purpose, for all the children I had helped over the years. And there was acceptance that some questions wouldn't have answers in this life, that some cycles wouldn't close in the way I wanted. The 1990s continued to bring changes for me and for America. Our orphanage transformed into a broader welcome center, offering not just housing for abandoned children, but also support for families in crisis, programs to prevent abandonment, and preparation for adoption. In 1997, at 47 years old, I received an invitation I would never have imagined to participate in a national commission on the rights of children and adolescents. I, who had started my life as an abused girl on a poor farm in rural Kentucky, was now helping to shape policies that would protect other children from suffering the same fate. It was also during this time that I began to feel the need to share my story more broadly. Not the complete story. Some parts were too painful too private. But the journey of overcoming, of transformation, of finding purpose through pain. I began to give lectures, not just about childcare techniques, but about resilience, about healing, about how to build something meaningful from the most difficult experiences. "You should write a book," suggested a young nun after one of these lectures. "Your story could help so many people." The idea scared me initially. Put those memories on paper, expose myself that way. But the more I thought about it, the more I saw the potential to reach people who would never attend my lectures, who would never come to our center. I began writing in 1999 at 49 years old. It wasn't easy. Many nights I had to stop, overwhelmed by the memories that resurfaced. Other times the words flowed like a dammed river, finally released. Sister Grace, now quite elderly, but still lucid, was my first reader, my greatest encourager. The book, titled From Darkness to Light, A Journey of Healing and Redemption, was published in 2001. It wasn't a national bestseller, but it found its audience. Professionals who worked with traumatized children, survivors of abuse, seeking hope, people of faith interested in a story of spiritual transformation. The following decades brought both joys and challenges. The sender continued to grow, to evolve. I aged naturally, but maintained the energy and commitment to our mission. Sister Grace left us in 2005 at 92 years old, a loss I felt deeply, for she had truly been my spiritual mother, the person who guided me from despair to healing. In 2010 at 60 years old, I faced my own health challenge, breast cancer that required surgery and exhausting treatments. It was a difficult period which forced me to slow down, to accept help, to allow myself to be cared for instead of always caring for others. But it was also a period of deep reflection, of gratitude for the life I had lived, for the thousands of children I had helped. I overcame cancer and returned to work, although at a less intense pace. I took on a more advisory role, guiding the new generation of professionals who now led the center. I continued giving occasional lectures, writing articles, sharing the knowledge accumulated in decades of work. In 2015, I received an honor I would never have imagined, the Medal of Social Merit, awarded by the federal government for my contribution to child protection. The ceremony in Washington, D.C. was emotional, surrounded by colleagues and former children from the orphanage, now successful adults, some with their own children. Upon receiving the medal, I thought about the long journey that had brought me there. The abused girl who fled barefoot on a dark night, the young mother who gave birth in the shed and had her daughter torn from her arms, the nun who found her purpose in caring for other wounded children. So many versions of myself, so many transformations. Today, at 78 years old, I look back with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sadness for the pains that cannot be undone, for the questions that will never have answers. Gratitude for the life I was able to build despite everything, for the good I was able to do, for the children I was able to help. I still think about Mary Elizabeth every day. She would be 58 now. Is she alive? Did she have a good life? Does she have her own children? Grandchildren, perhaps? I'll never know. But I've learned to live with this uncertainty, to transform it into strength, to continue my work as far as my strength allows. And that's why, my dear friends, I'm here today sharing my story with you, so that you know that no matter how dark the night is, dawn always comes, that no matter how deep the wounds are, healing is possible, that no matter how many losses we suffer, we can still find purpose. We can still make a difference in the lives of others. If my story has touched your heart, please leave your likes and subscribe to this channel. Each subscription, each like, helps me continue sharing stories like mine, reaching people who might need to hear that, yes, it's possible to survive the worst storms that life sends our way. And if you want to join this conversation, leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I love learning about all the different places where the Grandparents Tales community connects from. It helps me feel that I'm not alone in this journey of sharing my life with you. Life is a journey with many paths. My dear, we can't always choose what happens to us, but we can always choose how we respond, how we transform our experiences, how we use our pain to grow and to help others. That's the true liberation, the true healing, not the absence of scars, but the transformation of them into bridges to reach other wounded hearts. A loving embrace from this grandma who learned the hardest way, that our greatest strength usually reveals itself precisely in the moments when we think we have no strength at all.